am so excited to be here today talking about something that I am incredibly passionate about, and that is diversity. My name's Melissa van der Hecht, although I don't speak Dutch. I did get a letter once addressed purely to De Van. It was from the Labour Party and it made me slightly nervous. But as Alex said, I've always been a technologist. I've always been a woman in tech. I did a maths and computer science degree, and after that I spent 3 years as a Drupal developer. And in fact, my first ever Drupal event was Drupalcamp London 2011, and it was in Croydon. You remember it? It was in Croydon about 2 weeks after the riots, and I can't remember which agency it was, but one of them that was exhibiting gave out their swag was a t-shirt that said, Drupalcamp 2011, what a riot! It really tickled me. Since then, I've spent 4.5 years at MuleSoft, which provides an integration and API platform in the pre-sales team. And for anyone who doesn't know what that means, I didn't either until about 6 months after I'd started. Essentially, this is working with the software, but being the link between the technical people within IT and the business people. So providing that translation between the different languages, the different mindsets, and the different priorities. And next month, I am about to start in another San Francisco-based tech startup. It's important though, and I need to also caveat this by saying everything I'm talking about today is my own opinion. I'm not here on behalf of any particular organization. Cool. My aim today is for every single one of us to walk out of here agreeing that we have a problem with diversity in technology. And for every single one of us to want to do our part in changing that. Hands up, who here already has a diversity initiative in some form? Oh, that's awesome. Maybe a quarter of people here. Firstly, well done. I'm sure you'll agree with me that making diversity work, like any kind of culture change, is really hard. Because we're not just talking about saying, oh, we need someone like this or someone like this. We're talking about completely rethinking the way that we do hiring, recruitment, rethinking our team dynamics, educating our staff, working out how to retain people who are from different backgrounds, not just hire them. So all of you who just put your hands up, I'm sure that you've learned loads and loads of lessons along the way, and I bet you've got a lot of valuable advice that you can share. So my request to you is, please do share it. I don't have all the answers to all of this, and I can't tell you what you need to do. As I said, it's not easy. There isn't one single answer or one simple answer to doing this. What I am going to be talking about is what I've learned in my own experience being a woman in IT. The lessons that I've seen, I've learned being part of an underrepresented group, and what it's felt like to me being somebody who doesn't fit the stereotype. And share with you some of the changes that we can all make to have a positive impact on our workplaces. Obviously, diversity is not just about being a woman in IT. It's not just about gender though. And I've been given the wonderful post-lunch graveyard shift where everybody's eaten a bit, feeling a bit sleepy. So I want to make this really engaging. So please, I'd love you all just shout out any other factors that come to mind when we think of diversity.
Culture, background.
Culture.
Color.
Colour.
Sexuality.
Sexuality.
Education.
Age, education.
Beliefs.
Beliefs.
Disabilities.
Disabilities, exactly. There are so many different factors that we have to take into consideration, building out each one of these one by one. And it's really easy for us to think, well, diversity is, in technology, it's being a woman. Or diversity is in a world of white people being somebody who's not white. But it's so important that we all agree that diversity is about making sure that we have a representation of people from different backgrounds. Diversity for me is a measure of how different people are from each other. But in my opinion, our end goal isn't a 50-50 split between men and women. It's not fulfilling quotas on the number of people we need to have from different backgrounds. These can be very useful techniques in driving change and achieving diversity, yes, and I'll come on to that a bit later. But in my opinion, diversity is about equal opportunity. It's about removing the stereotype of who someone's expected to be. So you're not judged or penalized differently for being different from the mold. Why is diversity so important? We see diversity talked about more and more often. I go to quite a lot of tech conferences actually, and diversity is starting to become a trend that people are talking about. We see it more and more online. Why am I here at Drupalcamp talking about diversity? And also, some of you might be wondering why I'm using such a garish slide theme. The answer will become clear. I'll explain all of it. You're going to have to wait till the end to find out. Companies that have more diverse teams see 19% more revenue from innovation. What does that mean? Let's say that your revenue is 250 million. That means an extra 47.5 million just from having more diverse teams. I mean, that's not news, right? Studies have shown for years there's a very strong correlation between diversity and innovation. But what can be a bit harder to realize is that the need to innovate is growing. The need for businesses to be able to change quickly, to adapt to the forces around them, to create new ways of generating revenue, the importance to do that is increasing, and therefore the importance for you to innovate faster is increasing. And this means that the more diverse you can have your team set up, the more you'll see the value of innovation. Why? It doesn't take a genius to work it out. If you have a team who are all the same type of person, same education, same background and way of thinking, they'll all come up with the same kind of ideas when you give them a problem. As soon as you start to introduce a bit of variety into the mix, this is where we start to see some different ideas. The more variety you have, the more people who have different life experience, the more people who think in completely different ways, the more different ideas are going to be. And also, the more people will be able to challenge each other to come up with an idea that they would never have been able to come up with on their own. This is called diversity of thought. Let me give you an example. There's a startup in the US that had an incredibly successful first 18 months. Every single developer that they hired came from the same year group, of the same university, having done the same degree. They were very, very similar to each other. That helped them get to market incredibly quickly because they knew exactly how to work with each other, they knew how each other thought, and they could just sit down and get the job done. But once they'd gotten to market, that's when the problem started. They couldn't change. They didn't know how to change because every single person thought in the same way. And it was only when they started to change the people in their company that they started to actually be able to adapt in the way that they needed to. Has anyone here heard of Belbin or done a Belbin test? A few people, yeah. If you haven't, I highly recommend you do this. It's really fun, but it's also really interesting from an individual contributor perspective and from a management perspective. In the 1960s, this wonderful chap called Meredith Belbin did a huge amount of research into the different dynamics and roles that really need to exist within a team. And he came up with 9 of them. We have the plant. Everybody knows someone like this, a bit of like the mad scientist. They come up with loads of crazy ideas, they're free thinking. Once they've come up with an idea, they pass it over to somebody else and they move on. We've got the resource investigators. These people, when they're given a problem, they're very resourceful at finding out how to solve it. They've got a huge network. They have lots of contacts. They can even source opportunities from broader places in their network outside of your individual team. And this helps your team to have that web and those links with the other people that you need. We've got the coordinators. These people have the ability to take a step back, see the big picture, and then delegate work according to what really needs to be done with that perspective. As I'm going through this, see which ones you identify with the most as well. The shapers. The shapers are very driven to be successful. They'll work incredibly hard, and sometimes other people who are from different roles, they may see this as stubbornness. This may cause a bit of conflict. But the shaper just wants to do everything that it takes in order to do their job successfully. Monitor evaluators. They are very logical observers. They make unbiased decisions, and they're able to critically assess a situation without taking into account any kind of prejudice or influence. Team workers, kind of the unsung heroes really of the team. They tend to go more unnoticed because they're slightly more in the background, but they're the critical part of ensuring all these different roles can communicate together with all of their different mindsets. Implementers, self-explanatory. You've got the idea, I'm going to make this a reality, I'm going to do some action. Completer finishers, a perfectionist. I'm a perfectionist. And everybody knows perfectionists. And specialists, again, this is self-explanatory. Why am I talking about this though? As I said, I am a complete perfectionist. You know the 80-20 rule? I spend about 99% of my time doing the extra unnecessary 20%. And it's one of the challenges that I'm always trying to work through. And that's great when I'm working with people who aren't like me, but imagine that every single person in my team is like myself. We'd never get anything done. Imagine if we had a whole team of plants. Might be very green, but with people who like coming up with the ideas and moving on, again, we'd never get anything done. There have also been lots of studies to compare the different traits that men and women exhibit. This is just one of them by Good & Co, but there's loads of different ones online all saying very similar things. And as I said, being a woman in technology and equality is not about thinking that men and women are the same. We are different. We have different traits, and we need to actually understand, recognize, and celebrate that. I find this fairly accurate because I have a very strong sense of empathy. And without saying that men don't, most do, most of the people I work with are men, but my sense of empathy plays a much stronger role than theirs in the work that we're doing. So when we're working as a team, when we have the same problem, I'll come at it from a different perspective. And the end result here is that my team has more well-rounded thinking. But it's not just about company performance. Diversity, this is a study from LinkedIn. Every year they produce a report on the global trends that they see in hiring and recruiting. Again, fascinating. I recommend you read this. It's full of lots of helpful graphs as well. That's much easier to digest all the information. But they've said 3/4 of companies actually focus on diversity as a way to improve company culture. Having a more diverse environment to work in boosts employee well-being. It's more stimulating, it's more engaging. You're happier as an employee, and therefore ultimately you will do your best work. It's also one of the biggest factors that candidates take into account when they are looking for new jobs. If you're able to demonstrate that you have a diverse culture, that it's an important part of your company values, then you will be able to attract a wider talent pool as well. Think about the end customers, the end users that you serve. How diverse are they? How can you best represent them? Well, you need to be able to empathize with them. So it's also important that your diversity reflects the diversity of the people that you want to provide products to. I think it was Costas at the beginning actually said that you need to have people in a team who think in the way that you want your future customers to, not just your existing customers. LinkedIn has said that diversity is the #1 trend that people are focusing on now when looking at their hiring process. And every single generation, we're making great progress at achieving diversity, whatever the definition of that is. Let me give you an example. I've always been a bit of a geek. I've always been the kind that's much more into maths and science and computing. And I went to a girls' school and we didn't have computer science as a subject. So I did the next best thing, that was IT. Really boring, I can tell you that. It's basically how to use Microsoft Office and what is the Data Protection Act. And off I went to my computer science degree, fresh-faced 18-year-old, with my ITA level. There are about 80 people doing the same degree as I in computer science, and 4 of us were girls. So most of the 76 boys there, they'd already learned how to code as part of their school education. I toyed around with it, but I'd had no formal education. And this meant day one, I was already at a disadvantage compared to most of my peers. So I had a much steeper learning curve before I could even be on a par with the people that I was going to be learning with. A few months ago, though, I checked back in with my school syllabus, and I am very happy that they do now offer computer science to every single girl in that school. And that's really good. We're seeing job roles like Chief Diversity Officer, Chief Equality Officer are appearing in companies. Salesforce is one of them. In fact, Mark Benioff, who's the Salesforce CEO, he's spent $3 million, not once but twice, reviewing the gender pay gap and correcting it. He's also stipulated that at least 30% of the people in meetings need to be female. Guess what? Salesforce attracts phenomenal talent. Salesforce have won loads of awards for the best place to work across the world, and for diversity, and for women in tech. So things are starting to change, and this is great. But are we there yet? No. Out of the CEOs of all the companies in the Fortune 500, there are more men named James than there are women. It's ridiculous. Out of the 500 CEOs, 3 of them are black. So we still have a long way to go. My first lesson then is that diversity makes teams better. But we need to keep pushing for it. We need to keep driving change in order to really achieve it. What's it like when you're not the expected person? What's it like when you don't fit the mold? I've never fitted the stereotype of any role I've worked in. I mean, let's face it, as a woman in technology, you don't. 17% of the people in the UK working in technology are women. That's not actually very many. And yes, this is a stat about being a woman in technology, but I'm also speaking as somebody who doesn't fit the expectation and what that means emotionally. So although I can only speak for the stereotype that I am and that I'm not, a lot of these things also apply to anybody in a different position who also doesn't meet that stereotype. Now I know pretty much everybody in here is a guy, and I'm going to tackle the beast in the room head on and talk about sexism. I've had instances where there have been meetings that we're arranging for me and a sales guy to go off and meet with a company. And someone on the email thread has assumed that I'm the PA organising the meeting because I was the only woman included. People have called me a demo queen before because I'm female and I'm pre-sales. I've had one instance, and I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on this, by the way, because I still have no idea what the answer is to this. But I've had one instance in a sales meeting when I was sat next to a CTO that we were working with. And I said something, can't remember what it was, and he laughs, and he looks at me, and he touches me on the elbow. And this doesn't register with anybody else, but it makes me feel really uncomfortable. And I'm thinking, you wouldn't have done this if I were a man. But I've been really fortunate in that the colleagues that I've worked with haven't made judgments or assumptions about me and my skills based on my gender, and some of my biggest supporters are men. Sexism isn't the issue here. The issue is the bias that we all have of what we think good looks like and who you're expected to be. Let me ask you, what do you think of when I say computer scientist? This is the first page of a Google image search. These are the very first results. 7 of the 9 people here are men. What about nurse? 10 out of the 13 nurses here they're women. What about CEO? We have 23 people, 2 of them are women, 3 of them are black, 2 of them are Asian. The rest of them, 16, are white men. Well, 15 and 1 president. This is the very first result. This is from Wikipedia. This is a pretty homogeneous group of people. And it's this consistency that sets the expectation of what a CEO should look like. This is the messaging that we all see, whoever we are, whether or not it's on a Google image search, whether it's in books, on TV, or in the companies around us and in our workplaces. So the more that we have this set around us, the more our expectation is set that this is what you need to be like. Let me go back to my list of results. The first automatic filter that Google has created here is female. Being a female and being a CEO is so notable that it's been called out. That an automatic filter has been created to make you search for them because it's different from the average result. Imagine being so different from a stereotype that Google creates a way to call you out so that you can be found. When something deviates from a stereotype like this, it makes you stop. It makes you think. If you're not like the person you're expected to be, people will notice you more. People will question you more. And sometimes you need to prove yourself more just because you're not quite visually what people are expecting you to be. So this is more of the issue that I've actually faced. It's more about credibility. In my role, I've typically worked with architects, like enterprise architects, solution architects, and by and large, they're guys, and more often than not, people are older than me. And in fact, when I started this role, some of them were literally twice my age. And I would walk into a room, and my job there was to evangelize, was to help this group of people understand why my approach would be able to deliver more value than what they were already doing. And this can be very hard to listen to when somebody is a lot younger than you, for example. There's another guy I've worked with who's a year younger than me, and he's faced exactly the same problem. This isn't about gender, as I said, it's just about the differences that you are and what you're expected to be. So what happened to me then? I felt the need to prove myself. I felt the need to work hard, to work harder, and to keep working harder so that I could earn the right to be heard before people would listen and then start hearing what I was saying rather than see who was saying it. I've also noticed that I have different thought processes from most people in my team. Most of the guys I work with are men. I'm in IT. And as we saw earlier, there are slightly different traits that are exhibited by men and by women. And when I first started, I saw everybody else around me thinking in a similar way to each other. They were all naturally good at things like being assertive, being decisive. Both of those are things that I find really difficult. So I would work even harder to prove that I could do that just as much. But what that also caused me to feel is inferior. If everybody around you is successful and they're all similar to each other, you feel the need to conform. You feel like you need to be as good at them, at the same things as them in order to be successful as well. I pushed myself pretty much to breaking point a couple of times, just from the pressure that I felt under from this world around me, from being an expectation rather than the rule, and the pressure that I put on myself as well to make sure that I was being noticed for the right reasons. Hands up, who has ever, or who knows anybody that's ever taken time off from burnout or stress? Burnout is something that affects many industries, and the Health and Safety Executive, part of our UK government, reported that last year 15.4 million working days were lost from work-related stress. That's crazy, right? Think about how much you could have achieved even if a tenth of those days had been saved. They also said that burnout is more common in women than in men. Typically, this is put down to the extra expectations that women have outside of work, like the need to raise your family, the need to manage the household. A company called Blind surveyed 11,500 people working in tech and said that actually 57% of workers said that they had been burned out or were currently experiencing burnout. And that's high compared to most industries. And we all know what the culture is like in tech, or the stereotype of the culture. It's a brotopia where you're expected to work incredibly long hours, you're always connected, you're working really hard because you're motivated and you're loving what you're doing, but the expectation in a tech startup to produce results very, very quickly is demanding. Think about massive companies that have beds in the office, that have hairdressers, everything that you need so that you never even actually have to leave the office. You can stay there, you can live there, and you can keep doing your work there. I want to propose a third group though, and this is people who don't fit the stereotype. I've seen people like myself burn out more than people who fit the mold because of the extra pressure that we place ourselves under in order to be successful and in order to conform. And in fact, women are twice as likely to leave a job in technology compared to men. Black and Latino workers are 3.5 times more likely to leave a job in technology. So diversity isn't just about hiring diverse people. If we put women in technology, if we put minority groups in technology, or if we put any minority in an environment where they're not the expectation, we can't expect them to be successful without doing anything else. We'll create a vicious cycle because these people, more often than not, will feel under extra pressure to conform. They'll feel under extra pressure to prove their credibility and show that they are just as good even though they're so different. And so we create this vicious cycle. So lesson number 1 was diversity makes us better. Lesson number 2 is that doing diversity right, making diversity stick, is about so much more than just hiring a diverse group of individuals. What is it about then? It's about a sense of belonging. It's about building a diverse group who all feel equally proud to be who they are. They all feel equally valued. They all feel equally welcomed by the people around them. I'm going to give you a riddle now, and I'm sure many of you will probably know this already, but I really like this as an example. A father and his son are in a horrible car crash, and the man dies at the scene. The son is rushed to hospital in a critical condition and sent straight into surgery. But the surgeon, seeing the boy, pulls back and says, "I can't operate on him. He's my son." How does this work? Does anybody know the answer and want to shout out?
His mother is a surgeon.
Exactly. His mother's the surgeon. I mean, it's obvious. But I'll hold my hands up. It took me longer than it should have done to actually work out the right answer to this, and I'm slightly ashamed of that, but I've learnt a lot from the fact that I did that. This is something called the surgeon's dilemma, and it is a test for unconscious bias, which in itself is a fairly controversial topic, and I'm not really going to go into, but the key point here is that we all have biases that we can project onto the world around us, that will influence our own behaviour, our own decision making, and will also influence the way that other people around us behave and act. What happens when your behaviour follows your bias, though? You will start to propagate the fact that people need to adhere to that stereotype. Unconsciously, you will create an environment in which people who don't fit that stereotype find it harder to fit in. So they'll be less willing to try, and the end result is we'll have less diversity. So what do we need to do instead then to counter this? We need to retrain this bias that we have so we can create an inclusive culture. And the first part of that is raising awareness that this is a thing. Whether or not you believe in doing a test for unconscious bias, is one thing, and it's a really useful tool for some people to just raise awareness that it exists. I hadn't heard of unconscious bias before I tried the Surgeon's Dilemma, and it was only from that I started reading about it. We need to make sure that we're talking about this with our colleagues in the workplace. We need to make sure that we're learning what biases we all have as individuals. Because it took me a while to figure that one out, I'm aware that I have this in my brain, and this is something that I'm consciously trying to make sure that I'm not bringing into any of my own decision making. We need to think about the language that we use with our colleagues, with our friends. I'm very guilty of telling people to man up when they're a bit reluctant to do something difficult. And that's an awful thing to say, because it implies that men can't be strong, and it implies that men can't be weak. And yet it's such an easy thing to just slip out of your mouth. How many people here greet a group of people by saying, "Hey guys"? I do. In fact, I've got a WhatsApp group that is entirely female. I'm like, "Hey guys, anyone out tonight?" We need to be aware of our conscious behaviours. Whenever you are making a judgment on someone or on somebody, play devil's advocate with yourself or with somebody else, and challenge yourself to provide a rational argument for your judgment. Since I've started focusing on women in tech and on diversity, I've been asking my colleagues around me for feedback, and a guy on my team told me a few months ago that in meetings, fairly often, I would start off sentences by saying, "May I just," as if I'm asking for permission to speak. And because I've been given this feedback, this is now something I'm making a concerted effort to change and to stop myself from doing. It's our subconscious behaviours that are arguably the hardest things to change, though, and that will have just as significant an impact. Our subconscious behaviours will only be changed over time with repeated experience, with repeated behaviours. And it's here that the role of setting quotas for different types of people can give you a benefit. Imagine that every CEO around you is a white man. It'll be much harder to train your subconscious not to find it more notable when you meet a CEO who is, say, a black woman. Whereas if every CEO around you represented a different type of person, they had a different background, a different religion, a different race, then you wouldn't even register it when a CEO didn't break that stereotype, because that stereotype has changed. Your expectation of who somebody should be has changed. This is where hopefully I have no technical difficulties. I want to show you something, a video that I really love that shows a little bit of what happens when we let our bias affect the people around us.
Hi, Erin.
Hi.
Okay, so I'm going to just give you some actions to do. I just do the first thing that comes to mind. Show me what it looks like to run like a girl.
Here.
Show me what it looks like to fight like a girl. Now throw like a girl.
Aww. My name is Dakota, and I'm 10 years old.
Show me what it looks like to run like a girl. Throw like a girl. Fight like a girl. What does it mean to you when I say run like a girl?
It means run fast as you can.
I love this video because, well, I mean, it makes us all think, and it makes us all realise a little bit of how ridiculous the world is around us. But children shouldn't grow up thinking that girls can't play sports or throw a ball. I did my first marathon last year, and it was incredibly slow, but I didn't run anything like the adults suggested in that video. And something that I've learned through being somebody who doesn't fit the mold is that when you don't fit the expectation of what you're supposed to be like, when there is this expectation around you and it's difficult for you to meet that, you can lose confidence. When I started my career many years ago, I was a junior. I'd not proven myself to anybody or myself, and I didn't really know what I was doing. And everybody around me was a guy, and they were my role models. They were the people that I was learning from and the people that showed me who I needed to be in order to progress in my career. So I started off working incredibly hard, as I've said, to try and be good in the same way as these people. But that made me burn out, it made me unhappy, and this is something I speak to quite a lot of people about, and this is something that's actually quite common. The turning point came for me was when I realised that what makes me different is what makes me special. I said a bit earlier that I have different traits from the people I work with. I'm a woman, I have female traits, the guys have male traits. And this means I approach my work in a different way. For example, we had a training course a few months ago, and part of this was about the solution design process. And what this means is coming up with a way to integrate all of your different systems and data sources together in such a way as it was efficient, it was reliable, and it was easy to change. So doing the solution design process is, more often than not, it's creating a diagram, an architecture that represents what that future state needs to look like. And in this training course, a few different examples from the field were shown as different approaches you can take to doing this. One of them, and I'm going to get quite technical here for a second, so bear with me. One of them was from a guy who's based in Australia. And his was incredibly detailed and low-level. It showed all of the different API endpoints that needed to be made available, the resources, the methods that should exist on each one, data schemas of the core entities that needed to be passed around the system so that you'd know they'd all speak in the same way, and the different order in which you had to orchestrate calls between those systems. A very valid approach, but for me it would have taken me ages to get down to that level of detail. But another example that was shown was mine. And I'd approached it in a very different way. Mine was very high level. As a typical architect, I had boxes and lines, and that was it. And what I'd also done was to just annotate on there the benefits that that approach would bring compared to how it was being done today. Pretty simple thing to do. But what I'd done is to use my power of empathy to understand the motivations of the person who would be reading this diagram. So I'd use that to make it more consumable to that particular person. And the fact that my example was one of the ones that was chosen proved to me that it's really different, yes, but it's also equally valid. And another thing I learned from the fact that my example was chosen was that being different isn't wrong. It's not better. But it's something that we should highlight so that we can help everybody else around us to learn. People who were sat around me in the training course said, oh, it would never have occurred to me to do things in that way. So although my approach isn't the only way and it's not correct in every scenario, by sharing the different ways in which we think and by having this variety in how we approach the same thing, I'm able to now use that to the benefit of my team. What is it that we need to provide people with then to help them come to this realization themselves? As before, we need to have that environment where it's an inclusive culture, where people feel safe to be different. But as leaders, we need to coach our employees to understand their differences, to understand their strengths, and to be proud to use them in their work. We need to work out ways to let those employees harness those strengths day to day. I've had great coaches, and also half of my realizations was just me kind of stumbling around and finding it out by accident. The earlier somebody is into their career, the less likely they are to have discovered any of this. So the more help that we can give people early on, before they've built the confidence to feel okay being different, before they've built the confidence to discover their strengths, be reflective enough to really understand what that means, If we can help them early on to be proud of their differences, then we will maximize the value that we can have from that person early on, and the happier that they'll be in our team. I'm going to go back to LinkedIn. There's just this quote essentially that I'm going to show you, which just highlights what the kind of core outcome is that we need to achieve here. Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. And belonging is like dancing like no one's watching. Now, I'm sure we've all heard loads of motivational quotes that say something along those lines, right? Probably not in the diversity sense, but dancing like no one's watching. What does that feel like? That's feeling free. That's having no inhibitions. That's feeling completely comfortable in who you are and completely comfortable being yourself around the people that you're with. And as leaders, this is the feeling. This is what we are all responsible for helping our employees to achieve. So my lesson number 3. Number 1, diversity makes teams better. Number 2, making diversity stick is about more than just hiring. And lesson number 3 is that people need to feel they belong. I'm going to close now by explaining the comic book theme that I've had in this presentation. Shout out, who's this?
Storm
Yes, what is her superpower?
controls the weather.
Exactly, Alex. Who's this?
Beast.
Beast. What does Beast do?
Very smart.
Very
Very
smart.
hairy and blue.
Very easy. He's also got superhuman strength.
He's got feet for hands.
Feet for hands. He's very clever and he's very strong. Who's this? What's her power?
Shape change.
Exactly. She's a shapeshifter. Imagine if all the X-Men were the same. In the fight scenes, they probably wouldn't win much, right? I mean, Wolverine, who doesn't love Wolverine? He's damn cool. But we all know in the fight scenes that everybody has a superpower and they go off and use it to save the day and to have that happy ending. But if everybody was the same, they wouldn't be able to achieve that. I love Steven Gerrard. But get well enough for you, Alex. In fact, I named my first car Stevie after Steven Gerrard. But if Liverpool had 11 Steven Gerrards in the team, they wouldn't do very well. It's diversity that makes us successful. The X-Men, they win every single fight because they all have different superpowers. They all know what their own strengths are and their weaknesses. And they also know what each other's strengths and weaknesses are. They always, in the fight scene, it's pretty formulaic. They'll get together, they'll huddle, they'll plan, they'll go off and they'll fight their own individual enemies using whatever superpower they have. And it always coincidentally works out that that's the right one for that particular individual. Typically as well, there's also a moment where one X-Man or X-Woman is about to be killed by one of the baddies and suddenly another X-Man swoops in and uses his superpower to save the day. And then goes back to the fight that they're already fighting. My request to you then, and what I want to close with, is help your teams to discover and to harness their own superpowers. Cool, how are you doing on time?
Very good.
2.5.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Melissa for that awesome talk?
Well, I don't
Michelle.
know. Have you seen my talk before?
Yeah.
Okay. I just came to the
I loved
realization. I came to the realization that if we get nurtured in the first 5 years of our life and we get a lot of scripts put in our heads, if we all have young children here, should we not help our team, but should we help our children to learn about diversity in the first 5 years already?
Yeah.
So they have a script in the future which enables diversity, because we come from a generation that, you know, the post-war generation, they got children and everything, and they had different beliefs about family roles and everything. Is that the future for us? By teaching our children that diversity is necessary to belong?
I think it has to be part of the answer. I think only starting to talk about diversity when people are already beyond school or where they're in the workplace, that's when they start learning about it, it's too late. I mean, as you said in your talk, Michelle, we learn our behaviours from the time that we're born.
Yeah.
And I think that, I mean, there's so many studies, aren't there, of like how, like nature versus nurture in children and development ages. I think that that's a really big lesson, actually, that we should have. Good suggestion. Like it. Phil, thanks. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a question, I just have a comment. You started by saying that you got a post-lunch session.
Yes.
Right, so I wanted to say this is one of the very few post-lunch sessions where I haven't felt like switching off.
Ah. Thanks so much. Thank you.
So what's your opinion on positive discrimination?
Ooh, now we're getting interesting.
And I'm asking the question, I'm organizing a lot of camps in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Where we have this discussion year in, year out, like we would love to have more diversity in the speaker team or in the people who get there. Like, should we give free tickets to women? Should we, how would we choose a speaker based on diversity? And I always get this discussion like, yeah, we should get the best speaker, not because she's a woman or whatever. So, what's your opinion on this?
My opinion is, can everyone hear the question, by the way?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. My opinion is that the end goal is to have no positive or negative discrimination, but in order to get there, we might have to do a bit of positive discrimination in order to get diverse groups represented in the first place. Because we can't go straight from being a society with stereotypes and with judgments immediately to one where none of that exists. I mean, it's human nature, it's human behaviour to have to learn that at so many different levels. And I think there have been quite a lot of studies actually that where if you remove a picture and a name off of a CV, then actually it changes substantially who is hired. So I completely believe that we don't need to employ somebody who's not good enough to do the job in order to represent diverse people. But I do think that we need to make a conscious effort to hire more women in technology, for example, to ensure that people from different origins are represented more fairly at events. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I do, yeah. So, it's not I have another thing, it's not a question, but more like a tip for other event organizers. It's a thing that we've done the last few years at Frontend United. We try to get a better diversity as well in the speakers. So what we did is in the call for papers, we asked the speaker if they felt that they are part of a minority.
Yep.
And they had an open field where they can fill in why they think they are part of a minority, whatever it is, and because they have disabilities or women or gender, whatever. And we didn't take that into account during the speaker selection, but if their session was not selected, they got a free ticket to attend the
nice.
event. And that really helped us gaining from like 15% of the women until I think it's 30, 33 last year. Yeah. So
That's a great change.
that's just
Nice. Thank you.
Cool. I think we're going to integrate that into Drupalcamp London next year.
I got one more question.
All right, quickly.
So, you talked about positive discrimination.
Yeah.
Is there any advice you'd give to somebody who wanted to provide support or mentorship or some kind of help to kind of give them a lift? Just the other way around.
So the question is, following on from positive discrimination, what kind of support can we provide or advice can we provide to people wanting to help give people a lift? Like help young women to be successful in a male-dominated environment, for example.
Yes.
I don't have all the answers to this at all, but I just speak from what has helped me. Having female role models around you that have already been successful proves to you that you can be there. It gives you something to aspire to be like. Even having a goal in mind of what you want to achieve helps you to focus on how you're going to achieve it, and to do that in such a way as you can kind of make it more about targets and quite empirical evidence rather than, oh, you know, I just want to break the mold and be a leader because. But also it's about having a completely trusted relationship with somebody. My manager at Milsoft, for example, a guy, but I would talk to him incredibly openly about my emotional well-being, about how I felt I was different, and as I've kind of started to develop my thoughts on this, I've been talking to him about it, and he's just kind of asked me questions around it just to try and help me develop my own thinking. So over time, I've just been given the safety, but also the freedom to kind of bit by bit feel more confident in what my point of view is.
Thank you, that's really helpful.
You're welcome. Happy to talk about it for much longer. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Melissa.